Call to order this meeting of the Senate Taxes Committee, March 18, 2025, 9:09 a.m. First item on, we do have a quorum. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. The minutes are in your packets. Any amendments or suggestions to the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are adopted.
Welcome to the committee. Senator Draheim, our first bill this morning is Senate File 765.
Thank you, Chair Rest. Good morning, everyone. Senate File 765 modifies the definition of metropolitan area for two different taxes. So the first section just changes the metropolitan area more or less from counties to the area of Met Council. Members, there's 5 portions of cities that are partially in and partially out of the Met Council area. Part of the taxes go to the Met Council, and that's the reason for the bill. In Section 2, the same thing, we redefine the area. And then Section 3, we strike the term counties and insert area. And then the effective date is after June 30th of 2025.
Okay, are there questions or comments for Senator Draheim? Is there anyone who wishes to testify? Senator Draheim, it's either yay or nay here this morning, but that's okay. Senate File 765 will be laid over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
The next bill on our agenda is Senate File 1108. Senator Gruenhagen.
Good morning, members and Madam Chair, and thank you for hearing Senate File 1108. I'll just give a brief comment, and then I have a testifier, Mr. Willett, from the League of Minnesota Cities, to also comment. Senate File 1108 allows the City of Stewart, which is a small community of about 400 population, to receive amount withheld in 2023 of local government aid, provided the state auditor certifies that it received the city's required financial reporting for 2022 by June 1, 2025. If this requirement is met, the Commissioner of Revenue must pay $87,501 by June 30th, 2025. This provides a one-time appropriation in fiscal year 2025 from the general fund to the Commissioner of Revenue to pay aid under this section. Okay, just a little history. Stewart is a very small community, as I said, about 400 and some people. This $87,000 is a huge benefit for them. And what happened, why there was confusion in 2023 was that, or was it 2022, they were switching city administrators, and the new administrator, the necessary filing with the Commissioner of Revenue was not done. It fell through the cracks. Later on, it was understood the mistake, and that's why this bill is before you today, to try to help out this community. So sincerely appreciate, Madam Chair, your consideration and support of helping this small community out. Now I'd like to have my testifier make a few comments.
Are there questions or comments for Senator Gruenhagen? Seeing none, welcome to the committee. Mr. Willett, if you'd identify yourself for the record.
Madam Chair, Pierre Willett with the League of Minnesota Cities. Essentially, I'm here to answer any questions. I want to sincerely thank the senator for bringing this bill forward and for the committee for hearing this bill again. We're hopeful that the city of Stewart will not be here before you again, as they are currently compliant with all their requirements for future LGA payments. And as you know, once in a while, with 750 cities receiving LGA, sometimes the cities do not get their paperwork in time or not at all. And we work very hard with the state auditor to make sure that happens every year.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Willett? This bill was included in Senate File 132? In 132. Any other comments? Seeing none, Senate File 1108 is laid over.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you,
Our
Madam
next-
Chair and Committee.
Our next bill is Senate File 960, Senator Putnam. Senator Putnam, proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, we do have an amendment. The A1 amendment changes the bill substantially.
Senator Putnam offers the A1 amendment. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Just one.
It was a very enthusiastic response, Madam Chair.
Aye. You should go to the, members should go to the Judiciary Committee. I mean, when they say aye, and when they say no, they say no. It's very, very different than here. The motion prevails and the A1 amendment is adopted. Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Senate File 960 updates and configures the taxation of riparian buffers. Those of you who have been on this committee for a while or have followed these issues for a while know that this is a complicated but important issue. So, Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I'd like to describe the existing law and practice and then describe the bill itself and the changes that we'd like to make. Minnesota Statute 103F.48 requires perennial vegetative buffers of up to 50 feet along lakes, rivers, and streams, public waters, and buffers of 16.5 feet along ditches. This practice is designed to reduce fertilizer runoff. Now, when this program was initiated, the state did not in any way compensate or provide any relief to farmers who were forced to take that land out of production. But farmers, being the exemplary citizens that they are, and dedicated stewards of the land, complied nonetheless. And these buffers, members, have worked incredibly well. We see significant evidence that streams with buffers have much healthier fish and insects, they absorb nutrients, and they prevent erosion, all the things that help both environment and farmers. Now, within the first year of the program, Minnesota farmers were over 99% compliant with the new law. Today, Minnesota farmers are 99.8% compliant statewide. In fact, 25 of 87 counties are 100% compliant with the law. Farmers have done their part without compensation for their work and missed commercial opportunity. Now, Madam Chair and members, a lot of farmers are still kind of angry about this issue. Not because they deny the environmental benefits or because they haven't been compensated for the land they cannot use. The enduring issue is that they are still taxed as if they could use the land. And they get reminded of this unfair situation every April 15th. So, Madam Chair, this bill provides a solution that would remedy this lingering resentment and provide property tax relief when farmers are really struggling and need some help, and it would do so without any additional taxation. This bill provides a partial property tax credit for agricultural land that the government has taken out of production and shifts some of the resources dedicated to implementation and enforcement of the program to pay for that property tax relief. Madam Chair, a couple months ago, I was talking with some friends from Minnesota Corn, and we noticed that the amount of taxation that the state brings in is almost exactly the same, incredibly close to the amount of the aid that we send out. And that aid was calculated for the implementation and administration of the program 10 years ago. And as I've said, Madam Chair, we are fully, almost functionally fully compliant with the bill, and it is implemented and working well. So between the general fund and clean water fund, the state has spent nearly $100 million on implementation of the buffer law. This funding has gone to counties, watershed districts, Bowser, and SWCDs in order to enforce compliance with the buffer strip law. Currently, these enforcement authorities are receiving $8 million a year from the Riparian Protection Aid program set up through the Department of Revenue. Now, members, in the process of working on this bill, I have contacted counties. I have talked to all sorts of people who get this aid, and the response has been, at best, inconsistent. It's difficult to actually tell how a lot of this aid is being used throughout the state. In some counties, it's clear, in others, it's not. So this $8 million, initially designed for implementation and administration, we're not entirely sure where all of it's going now. So given the high compliance rate and the increased fine for noncompliance, the original authorized amount for riparian protection aid is no longer necessary and could be used to help reduce the property taxes on acres in compliance with the law. So, Madam Chair, to the bill itself, Section 1 clarifies which lands would be eligible. Section 2 establishes that the credit would be 40% of the net tax capacity. Madam Chair, in case there's curiosity about where that number comes from, 40% tax relief is 50% of the buffer aid. So we are not taking all of the resources used for this aid, just half of it. Section 3 articulates accountability measures. Section 4 describes the payment process. Section 5 clarifies the appropriation. The bill also includes an effective date and some technical edits. Now, Madam Chair, that is the bill and its rationale. And now I'd like to turn it over to our friend for some comments.
First, are there any questions or comments for Senator Putnam? And I would point out, and we'll maybe get into it a little bit more later, the revenue estimate. But I also understand that there is an appropriation. I'm going to ask Mr. Munn to explain that to us. I understand it has some complicating factors that members may be interested in knowing how that's going to work. Mr. Munn.
Yeah, Madam Chair and members, there is a decrease in the appropriation to riparian protection aid in the bill. This is a decrease from the current law amounts, which are, I believe, $8 million a year. The reduction is designed to entirely offset the cost of the credit when accounting for income tax interactions and interactions with the property tax refund. So that's why the amounts are stated as they are in the bill.
Are there questions from members about the explanation that Mr. Munn just gave? Seeing none, we will proceed to the witnesses.
Good morning, Madam
Please,
Chair.
Please, Senator Putnam, did you?
Madam Chair?
Okay. Mr. Beck?
Yes, ma'am.
If you'd identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Wesley Beck. I'm currently serve as the first vice president of the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. Minnesota Corn has nearly 7,000 members and represent all of Minnesota's 24,000 corn farmers through our research and education efforts. I farm with my family near St. James, Minnesota in Watonwan County. We raise corn, soybeans, and hogs. I am also proud to say that Watonwan County is 100% compliant in the buffer law. On behalf of the Minnesota Corn Growers Association, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate File 960 today, and we appreciate Senator Putnam bringing this issue forward. Since the passage of the buffer law in 2015, Minnesota Corn Growers Association has advocated for buffer property tax relief. Senate File 960, as amended, begins to correct the property tax inequity that currently exists for acres in compliance with Minnesota's buffer law. In many cases, farmers are still taxed at the higher property tax rate as if those acres were still in production. In Senate File 960 as amended, farmers who who are in compliance with the buffer law will receive a credit equal to 40% reduction of what they are currently being taxed at. There are two key reasons why we support Senate File 960. Let me highlight them for you today. Number one, it's basic fairness. The buffer legislation passed in 2015 not only failed to provide any compensation to farmers for those costs to implement the buffer law, but farmers in compliance are taxed each year on buffer acres at valuations that assume those acres are still producing crops and revenue. Farmers are frustrated with this inequity, and Senate File 960, as amended, begins to address this and would make this uniform across the state. While implementing buffers along Minnesota's public waters may bring environmental benefits, it still came at a cost to farmers, not only to implement, but also the lost revenue on those acres that were taken out of production each year. Reason number two, farmers are compliant with the buffer law. Bowser has reported 99.8% statewide compliance with the buffer law. This is good news. Farmers have done their part. It's time for the state to do its part by closing the gap on property taxes on buffer acres. On our farm, we have approximately 4 acres of buffers. We have a public drainage ditch that we have on our property. We have a private drainage ditch, which dumps into a public water, and we also have a buffer strip on the public water. That's a 50-foot strip. They've worked well over the years. They've kind of become part of what we do, but we'd still like to have some recognition of what we've done. I also believe part of government's role is to incent good behavior by its citizens and its property owners, and this is one way of incenting those who have done what the state has asked them to do. On behalf of the Minnesota Corn Growers Association, we appreciate your consideration and would like to again thank Senator Putnam for bringing this bill forward. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Beck.
Thank you.
Yeah? Who?
Senator Nelson.
Oh, Senator Nelson?
I'll hold till after the testifiers.
Okay. Mr. Hilgard? Welcome to the committee. If you'd identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Tax Committee. My name is Matt Hilgart. Good morning. I work for the Association of Minnesota Counties. AMC represents all of Minnesota's 87 counties. And firstly, I want to thank the author for his transparency and outreach. In fact, his work began in December when I received a text saying, I'm going to do something and I think you might have some concerns about it. And so we have been talking since then. I've just really appreciated his candor. I think the mutual agreement that something should be done here. In fact, many of our commissioners, as you can imagine, from 87 counties are farmers themselves or active members in the Corn Growers Association. I also want to say that we do support the underlying premise which is that we do believe landowners are due recognition for the buffers that they were required to put in to law based on the 2016 changes. We also say in many cases landowners are receiving some type of benefit, and really I appreciate that, especially in Section 1, that the bill's author has said that land enrolled in CREP or other conservation programs is not eligible. So I think that's a layer of thoughtfulness that recognizes the complex array of benefits that do go to certain farmers that may have eligible buffer acres. I also appreciate the fact that this amendment, not the underlying bill, but the new amendment does talk about a credit amount of 40%. And I think that's a fair policy question of, does the land hold value? Does it hold no value at all? I think that's a fair question that I think a lot of folks might have differing opinions on. And the last thing is, you've heard us testify in prior committees, Madam Chair, about concerns about property tax shifts. And I think that it's very laudable that the author is going about a credit approach, because my understanding of his interest in this is that he doesn't want to create a point for just consideration as we hopefully continue to work on this proposal throughout session. The first concern is just more of a logistic one. I think the implementation date of this credit being effective for property taxes payable is 2026. may be a high goal. It might be something that we should talk about. I'd love to get some just assessors, auditors, and frankly, the SWCDs who we task with a fundamental part of certification of these lands in this act, just to make sure that we can meet that if it were to become law. The second one is that this the bill does pay for itself by taking a portion of our buffer aid. I think we would respectfully counter that we feel like this aid is warranted. We are doing hard work. We feel that enforcement is not just a one-time mechanism. It's great that we're over 95% compliance across the state. That's wonderful. That's a testament to our farmers and frankly the good compliance work that is being done with the buffer aid. In several of your communities across the state, this aid does trickle down to SWCDs, so we'd want to just know what the effect of that could potentially be and the resulting outcome if counties choose not to enforce the buffers, which is an option, and those duties going to Bowser. And I think that brings me back to just my general philosophical question about there's alignment over the goal that something should be done. And the question is, what's the best mechanism to do it? I think in some conversations that we've had as an association, there's a question of, there's an agreement that there is a lack of uniformity. And so if uniformity is the key, as well as trying to provide some tangible benefit, is there something that we could be more directive to our assessors and how to assess these parcels? That's something that we'd like to dig into. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd conclude my remarks. Thanks for the opportunity today to testify.
Senator Nelson now.
These are just questions about the bill in general. So are we ready for those, or do you have
Of
more
course.
testifiers?
Questions about the bill in general
Yeah.
or for Senator Putnam?
Thank you so much. Well, Senator Putnam, I also agree that, with a hearty thank you, that you've given some great thought to this, and it is a thorny issue. I was here in 2015 when this law was passed, and it caused great rancor, rightfully, in our ag community. And so it's too bad it's taking so long to address it, but I think you're on the path of trying to address this inequity. But I do have a couple questions as well for consideration. One is, our counties are already, if Governor Walz's proposed budget were to go forward, our counties are already in a dire strait because of I think, nearly $500 million of state services that are being pushed down for county implementation, but without the resources to do so. So I worry about reducing county funding at a time where they might be tasked with figuring out how to fund some state services, important state services, like for our most vulnerable Minnesotans, for example. So I think that is a real concern regarding timing here. And then I also wanted to note, how about schools? How are the school districts affected by this lower property tax rate? And is there any, maybe they're not affected, but I'd like to get an answer on how this would affect our schools, which also, by the way, are struggling mightily after the last legislative session. I know you must have heard it too. Nearly every superintendent and school board has talked to me about the unfunded mandates that have come down to them, along with funding, but the funding didn't cover the unfunded mandates. So they're struggling as well. So I'd like you, if you could address how this might affect school districts as well.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Nelson, but for both acknowledging the complexity of the issue and its importance. Now, in terms of the, sort of component of American federalism here that we're dealing with, in terms of jurisdictions, clearly the state is going to probably shift some of responsibilities to the county because the federal government has left us behind. So when we think about how these resources shifting, we can't let the federal government off the hook. Now, secondly, when you're talking about these resources being employed at counties for social services, that's not what they're for. Those resources are for enforcement of this specific bill, this specific law. If they're being used for social services, they're not supposed to be doing that. And that's been one of the challenges with this bill, is I've asked so many people, talked to so many people about how this riparian aid is being used. It's being used differently in every single county. Some counties don't get it, some counties get more, some counties get less. So that consistency of the aid is also very difficult to tell. So it's hard to say what holes we'll need to plug because we don't know what holes are open on that sense. Now, in terms of school districts, I will say that I can speak about my own school district with some knowledge, and I can tell you that the St. Cloud Public Schools are not in deficit because their superintendent, who is both incredibly skilled and very cute, did not spend COVID money, one-time money on long-term promises. So school funding itself is a lot more complicated too. But the ultimate point of your question, school districts are held harmless by this. There should be no consequences for school districts by this move. And I also want to sort of further explain too why we're only doing 40%. We're only doing 40% partially because some of these lands they can still be hayed. So there is still some possibility of use to some extent. And also, we don't want to completely cripple the counties at all. We just think that since these resources were put together for implementation and accountability, we're shifting essentially the implementation component since the law has been in effect for 10 years. So that's as best as I can do to, I think, answer the questions that you asked. Senator Nelson.
Thank you. Madam Chair, just a brief follow-up.
Yes, certainly,
Yes.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you so much. And Senator Putnam, thank you for the further comments. What I would say is that I don't know yet what the feds are going to do or not, but we'll hang on to that. That's not our jurisdiction here. However, I do remain concerned about additional less revenue to the counties. You know, they have one pocketbook.
Right.
And if that pocketbook doesn't cover the expenses, we know where it goes. It goes to the property tax, which, of course, has its own challenges in this time of escalating values. So I do somewhat remain concerned about that, I think rightfully so. And regarding the school districts, I want to acknowledge that school districts that have spoken to me have also been very wise and have not spent in deficit. But they have one pocketbook also. And when that pocketbook is used up with unfunded state mandates, it goes to the property tax holders too. And it is no reflection on these school districts that happens. That's a reflection on the state deflecting its responsibilities to the school districts. And that did happen in the past. That's not speculative. That's exactly what happened in 2023. You probably have seen the spreadsheets as well as how much it's costing each of your districts for those mandates. So, but my last question, and I want to wish you well as you go forward with this. I think it's needed. I think we just have to be cognizant of shifting costs. And it's a responsible thing to do. I had one final question, and so currently the bill would reduce the aid to counties by 40%. I understand if your bill were to go forward. The riparian buffer credit would be reduced by 40% in 2025 aid. Is that correct?
It's 50%.
Oh, reduce it by 50%.
Senator Putnam?
Sorry, Madam Chair. The aid itself is reduced by 50% in order to facilitate a 40% tax credit.
Oh.
You understand?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the clarification. That's a very important piece.
Complicated calculations within this bill to achieve the result that Senator Putnam and allies are looking
Yes.
for. So,
One final
so I
wrap-up.
appreciate your question so
Yeah.
that we can fully understand, or at least begin to understand, how these interactions would work, not only this year, but going forward, which is why I find this chart that has been devised by Ms. Johnson very, very helpful to us.
Thank you. And my final wrap-up, Madam Chair, if I might.
Yes, go right ahead.
Yes, and
Senator
thank you
Nelson.
so much. This has been a very good discussion. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the chart. Very helpful indeed. And that does get to my last question regarding ongoing in estimated aid in 2026, 2027, 2028. And I see that there are additional reductions in the out years, not nearly as significant, but I'm wondering if Ms. Johnson might explain a little bit about, we've talked very much about 2025. I'd like to also understand these out years as well.
Ms. Johnson?
Madam Chair, Senator Nelson, so the appropriation for riparian protection aid is under current law 8 million, and and that will be the case for fiscal year 2026, which is 2025 aid. Then there's this initial decrease to 4.16 million for fiscal year 27, 2026 aid year, and then to 3.94, and then 3.83 for fiscal year 2029, and then that will be continuing thereafter.
Thank you. I think
Senator
that.
Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that helps clarify a little bit, so there's a kind of a big impact perhaps now, but then it continues at a slower rate. And I want to be clear, I am not necessarily opposed. I think this is very much needed. I'm just very cognizant of the shifting costs onto our counties mainly, but also still looking at our schools as well. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Weber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you, Senator Putnam, for bringing a bill forward. I was also here when the buffer strip legislation was put into effect. And at that time, it was my position that the state created an unconstitutional taking. And I still maintain that, because property was taken without proper compensation. And that is unconstitutional. It always has been. It always will be. And quite frankly, to deal with the farming community in a fair manner, the reality of it is that land that is included in buffer strips should be valued appropriately. Right now, we see a variation of that going on amongst the state, around the state. Now, if a property was allowed to be enrolled in the CRP program for which they're getting a CRP payment, it is appropriate, in my opinion, to value that as cropland, because quite frankly, that's how the market deals with CRP acres out there. But if it does not qualify for enrollment in the CRP, then quite frankly, it should be valued as normal waterway acres, which is a substantially lesser value than cropland values. Now, the problem that creates is that we will, of course, create a shift within the valuation of county properties. But if we want to talk about fairness, that is the fair way to deal with the issue that's out there. And to say that, well, they'll get a 40% credit is to assume that that property is worth 60% of cropland value. And the truth of the matter, it is not. And so, it is a complex problem. I think that's the one thing we all learn in real estate tax law, is that there are multitude of issues that arise. And while I'm supportive of your bill, I just want you to know, and I want the members to know, that I think that it still falls short of producing a level of equity to those property owners who had property unconstitutionally taken from them. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Weber. Senator Driscollowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I did enter this discussion late, but Senator Putnam, this is another bill that, as I look at it, and I agree with Senator Weber's comments and believe that it was an unconstitutional taking. And our Constitution clearly says if the government's going to take land, they need to reimburse the value to the people they take it from. Have you considered the legacy money, the Clean Water Fund for this rather than the general fund? This is, I mean, members, this is like very clear to me that this is a public interest around water quality, which is exactly exactly what the people voted for in 2009. And so I see it looks like, again, it looks like it's a general fund expenditure, but it would make sense, it would make super duper duper sense, Senator Putnam, for this to come from the Clean Water Fund. And I'd encourage you to consider that, and anything I can do to help in that area. But we really need to get this matched up with what the intent of the people of Minnesota were. If they wanted to keep water clean, that is fully the intent of the buffer law, and it seems to me that's where the money should come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. The revenue estimate shows at the bottom line that there is zero impact on the general fund, and this might be a super duper way of achieving that, but at the end, the constitutional question is not addressed, as you and Senator Weber have indicated. I don't know, Senator Putnam, if that's something that you want to comment on. It's not part of your bill, but certainly invite you to do so if you would like.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I might just, if I could, respond to some of the arguments that we've heard, because I think we've heard three distinct, very important perspectives, but they're not in alignment. So Senator Nelson essentially wants to keep the counties whole. Senator Weber essentially wants to take the tax away, and then the counties would have to shift their own services and their own money in their own way. So there's disagreement there. And then Senator Drazkowski offers up a whole third option, which is take the money from the Clean Water Fund. From my perspective, and from the perspective of the farmers I talk to, farmers know that better is better than worse. This is not a perfect solution, but it's a step in the right direction. And I'm also going to say it's a logical one, because the resources that we are shifting from are resources that are supposed to be used for a specific purpose, and they no longer are necessary for that purpose. So I do agree that there is a deeper issue here, a deeper, more fundamental fairness concern. But I also know that this is a pretty good step in the right direction. At least that's something that I believe.
Thank you, Senator Putnam. Is there any further discussion of Senate File 960? Seeing none, Senator Putnam, Senate File 960 as amended will be laid over. Last bill on our, oh, I'm sorry, the next bill. Senator Weber's bill is the last one. But no, Senator Dibble, you're next, I'm sorry. Senate File 2199 is before us. Want to make a general comment ahead of time due to no fault of Senator Dibble, but recognizing his position as a member of this committee, I have allowed a cardinal rule, and I really mean that, of accepting as part of the presentation of this bill inexcusable distribution of materials from Hennepin County, which should have been in on time to be considered, and were not, but they are now being distributed, and certainly will be available for Senator Dibble and his testifiers to rely on. And if Hennepin County tries this again, the bill that they want to testify on will be removed from the agenda. That is not the case today. Senate File 2199, Senator Dibble offers the A2 amendment. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. it's a page and line amendment. The motion prevails, and the amendment is adopted. Senator Dibble, without prejudice, please present your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to present Senate File 2199. Not reflected on the bill as of yet, but I'd also like to thank my co-authors, Senators Klein and Senator Johnson Stewart. And very quickly, by way of brief overview, and the language is pretty straightforward. Senate File 2199 would allow for the value of real property subject to a conservation restriction or easement to be reduced by an assessor of a given county. And in this case, with the amendment restricted to conservation easements in a metropolitan county, if that county has adopted by resolution a program to protect farmland or natural areas. And so by resolution, they can authorize their assessor to consider the impact of that conservation easement on the property's value. And again, like I said, is confined to the metropolitan counties. At this point, with the adoption of the A2 amendment, Madam Chair, members, the reason you might be familiar with this bill, it was presented last year as well. In 2013, the law prohibited assessors in every county except Dakota from using industry standards and best judgments based on real-world market conditions to value conservation lands that were in private hands, except we had a discussion, of course, of buffer strips and ag areas. There is an exception for these kinds of conservation easements covering riparian buffers along lakes, surface waters, et cetera. Madam Chair, members, 76% of Minnesota lands are in private ownership, and so conservation easements serve as a key strategy to protect forests, wetlands, lakes, rivers, and prairies. Especially true in the Twin Cities metro area, where several counties do have specific land protection goals that were overcome in large measure by the 2013 law. So the counties would prefer an exception and allow assessors to determine if or whether an easement impacts their property value. And they do have some real-world examples to cite in which landowners have declined to participate in conservation efforts due to their inability to have the impact on the value reflected in the property taxes that they pay. Madam Chair and members, private landowners play a major role in advancing conservation in Minnesota. Easements are a popular protection option. It allows landowners to continue owning the property, but also participate in conservation efforts. And this, Madam Chair, while not cost-free, of course, we know, of course, the effects of reducing property taxes has a shifting effect and an interaction with the state's income tax. But it is perhaps the least expensive strategy for conserving wildlife lands and providing clean water and advancing climate goals. I did glance at the revenue estimate, which reflects as unknown in the out years when this would take effect. So at this point, we don't know what the effect would be, of course, on a property tax interaction. So it's a little bit of a question mark. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there questions or comments immediately for Senator Dibble before we proceed to the testimony? I will draw members' attention to the, not only to the impact of the amendment, but revenue estimate. Okay, we'll proceed to the testimony. Mr. Wayne Osley, if you'd identify yourself, please, for the record.
Chair, Senators, I am Wayne Osley. I'm the Director of Land Protection with the Minnesota Land Trust. Minnesota Land Trust holds about 750 conservation easements across the state of Minnesota, protecting more than 85,000 acres of Minnesota's priority natural habitats and waters. This bill is important for both landowners who have conservation easements on their property, but also our state's natural resources. Prior to 2013, county assessors, regardless of where they worked in Minnesota, evaluated properties with conservation easements under the same uniform standards of practice. In some instances, values were adjusted because of the easement. In other cases, they weren't. But everyone had the opportunity to have their properties fairly assessed based on the property's highest and best use as impacted by the conservation easement. The 2013 law now prevents that in most instances. The 2013 law created a number of fairness issues. Landowners contributing easements in different years are not treated the same. Those that entered prior to 2013 have a different set of criteria around which they are assessed versus those after 2013. Landowners with similar properties but in different counties are not treated the same. Dakota County is treated differently than all other counties. Assessors in Dakota County can fairly do their professional jobs. Those outside have to compromise professional practice to adhere to the law. Landowners with riparian lands may be treated fairly while those with only uplands are not, such as prairies or blufflands or upland forests. Landowners in water-rich parts of the state may be treated more fairly than those in other parts of the state. Some raise the question about the legal impact of creating two different systems. I would say that we already have that. Dakota County has a very different system than the rest of the state. Pre-2013 landowners have a different system than post-2013 landowners, yet no legal issues have arisen from those cases. Minnesota Land Trust only completes easements that have a great public benefit and help protect state and local conservation priorities. However, the confusion created by the 2013 law and inequities between landowners and between different parts of the state have been an issue ever since 2013. As land prices have risen in the past few years, this unfairness has only become more acute. Thank you for hearing this bill and helping landowners and counties recognize the fairness they deserve.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Dibble, would you go back over the difference between this proposal regarding metropolitan counties and the rest of the state? That I'm not all that familiar and would like a little bit more with this area, as I know you are, and I would like a little bit more explanation directly from you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if I understand your question directly, the bill is now confined only to the 7-county metropolitan area.
And why is that?
I think Mr. Hilgart will speak to that. There were objections that emanated from some experiences in northern Minnesota, and I think relate a lot to the experience out of the divestment of the Bland Incorporation and a lot of forested areas. And so a lot of those areas were, as the Association of Metropolitan Counties felt, counties up there were affected in several different ways when those forestry areas were divested. There was a benefit that occurred when those properties were sold. I don't remember all the particulars, but there were several factors that accrued to the landowners, and of course counties in those areas had quite a bit of area that was put under conservation easement, had quite a disproportionate effect on the shifting effects. I think there's probably a fairly significant effect on our interaction with our state budget, et cetera. And so to construe the bill more widely would have just different kinds of effects around the state, as contrasted with the metropolitan area, which the experience is different. It's a relatively small number of parcels that we're talking about, shifting effects are minimized, property values, if assessed against, the proverbial or theoretical highest and best use, would be very disproportionate to how the land is actually being used when preserved for natural preservation.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Your explanation is very helpful to me. Any other questions right now for Senator Dibble? We'll proceed to the next testifier. If you would identify yourself for the record.
Chair Rest and Senators, my name is Christine Maurer. I am a supervising environmentalist at Hennepin County and the program manager of our habitat conservation program, which serves residents and partners in pursuit of habitat protection and improvement through the establishment of permanent conservation easements with the Minnesota Land Trust and restoration actions. Thank you to Senator Dibble for carrying this bill and for the opportunity to testify today. Hennepin County supports measures to restore the ability to revalue private lands with conservation easements, which was eliminated in 2013. SF 2199 advances our efforts to protect and enhance wildlife habitat and water quality by improving fairness in property tax assessment for folks who choose to reduce the value of their property through the establishment of a conservation easement. Folks come to our program for a variety of goals: to protect their family heritage, preserve natural character, protect habitat for game and non-game wildlife, and protect our environment for future generations, all with the hope for an alternative for development. However, interested landowners routinely stop conversations about land protection after learning their property taxes can't be adjusted. For many, the combined uncertainty of future tax burden, fluctuation in financial and real estate markets, and the loss of value from an easement are too much financial risk, and they're forced to walk away from the pursuit of a conservation legacy. Those with agricultural lands who are enrolled in an agricultural tax incentive program face compounded financial uncertainty as they are simultaneously risking losing existing tax incentives. For others, lack of tax adjustment for conservation easements is perceived as unfair, and a failure to acknowledge the change in property value and the public benefit. Property owners are voluntarily engaging in conservation action and desire property taxes to accurately reflect the impacts of conservation easements to their property value. SF 2199 will not only help make land protection more accessible to more residents by reducing financial uncertainty, it will align tax policy with greater fairness and provide a meaningful acknowledgement to those who engage in voluntary conservation action. Additionally, this bill will help conservation programs, including ours, be more efficient with state funds. Hennepin County and the Minnesota Land Trust have collectively received $9.3 million from the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Fund over 3 grant phases, and we have used those funds to protect 415 acres of land and implement over 460 acres of habitat improvement projects. We believe this bill will make these state dollars go further. Reduced financial uncertainty and increased acknowledgement and fairness will likely allow more landowners to choose to partially or fully donate their easements, allowing grant dollars to go further. Additionally, fewer projects will likely be lost, improving staff time efficiencies and reducing contracting costs. In conclusion, Hennepin County supports this bill to allow our assessors to determine if and how an easement may impact the property value. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Are there comments for the testifier? Seeing none, the next 2 people are Connie LaFond and Nick LaFond. They would be together, or there's only one of you? That's fine, too.
Yeah.
Is Nick LaFond present?
He's not present today. I'm testifying.
Welcome to the committee. Ms. LaFond, if you would identify yourself for the record.
My name is Connie LaFond, and I would like to thank...
And if you would bring the microphone as close to you as possible. You have a very soft voice. And we definitely want to be able to hear you. Ms. LaFond.
My name is Connie LaFond, and I would like to thank Senator Rest and the committee for allowing me to testify today. I am a CPA and landowner in the city of Independence, Minnesota. My husband and I live approximately 30 miles west of Minneapolis in western Hennepin County, and we placed approximately 53 acres in conservation easements in 2024. I have also assisted clients with conservation easements and consulted with other landowners in Hennepin County regarding conservation easements. One of the major financial concerns with landowners considering conservation easements is the impact of real estate tax increases on conservation properties. As landowners, we are giving up a significant future financial incentive for development and agricultural use of our properties. My husband and I feel that the environmental benefit and future benefit to the general public outweighs the financial issues, but many landowners do not have that same thought process or ability to absorb real estate tax increases. Clarity regarding the real estate tax issue would be a great benefit to future landowner decisions. This bill would significantly reduce the uncertainty regarding taxation and assist landowners in making the decision to protect properties for future generations. Thank you.
Are there questions for Ms. LaFawn? Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if the testifier, how much were you paid for your 53 acres of easement?
Ms. LaFawn.
How much were we paid for the easement?
Yes.
We were paid approximately $200,000 from the Outdoor Heritage Fund.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the witness? Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Mr. Hilgard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. First of all, a great note of gratitude to Senator Scott Dibble for his work on this bill. And
You
it's
need
been,
to identify yourself.
Oh,
Mr.
I'm
Hilgard.
sorry, Madam Chair. Good to be back in front of you all. Matt Hilgart with the Association of Minnesota Counties. AMC is an organization representing the collective interests of all Minnesota's 87 counties. And again, to just echo, I do want to appreciate Senator Dibble's work on this issue, his collaboration. This has been a journey that started in 2023, but through it all, Senator Dibble has shown a willingness to hear a statewide perspective on this issue, and we do support the underlying amendment of this bill. And I'll get into that later. But Madam Chair, if you will, I think this conversation does merit a little bit of a trip back in history to say, why are we here in front of us? Obviously, this bill did not, if you look at this bill at face value, it doesn't seem like it would be controversial. It seems like there's certain precedent for conservation easement treatment in state law already. But I think we should take a trip back to a couple decades ago when this issue really came before the legislature. And the case that I'll reference is this particular Blandon easement. About 2 decades ago, the state of Minnesota entered conversations with the Blandon company about putting 187,000 acres into a conservation easement. Now, Blandon, to my knowledge, does paper. That's their industry. This easement didn't take away their ability to harvest paper, do timber management, do timber harvesting. It just said that these lands will not be developed in the future. To Blandon's purpose, great. They can still do their work, and they were paid $44 million for that easement of state funds. $30 million, I think $36 million, which came from the Legacy Fund. Now, I'll call this the triple dip, and it's not a Dairy Queen cone. It's a tax story, unfortunately. But that was the first payment. The second was Blandon came back to the Minnesota Tax Court and said, listen, our bundle of rights has been eroded, and therefore the valuation of these properties, a quarter of the size of Rhode Island, isn't $120 million of value. It's only $20 million. And the tax court, even the judge in his opinion said, I'm hand-tied here. I really don't have the ability to do anything other than to reduce these values, right? And they reduced those values to $20 million, over an 80% tax shift and reduction to that community. Now, what that meant was those 4 counties ran to the Capitol screaming, we have millions of dollars in taxes that will not be coming forward that we owe back, and that we don't know how to manage this. For Itasca County itself, it was $2.3 million. The third was a 2017 shift in law that provided SFIA payments for these properties. So here we, again, a timber producer, still harvesting timber, $44 million easement, 80% property tax reduction, and an SFIA payment that's $7 an acre. They were no longer eligible, but they weren't eligible in the past if you got a conservation easement. That's the triple. I forgot about the quadruple dip, which is that the federal tax system also allows an income deduction for conservation easements. So when you take these into effect, it makes sense about the underlying law that we are protecting in this bill today, which states that assessors shall not reduce the value of these properties. And I guess I would respectfully counter regarding the first property, or the testifier, this is fair. This was the conclusion of this tax committee back a decade ago. A then tax chair, Skoy, working in a bipartisan fashion to say, members, what are we going to do with this huge concern? If easements are going to be a predominant method of conservation, which we're not saying we're opposed to at all, how do we do that while protecting the underlying community itself? How do we do that by protecting the tax base? And this is how we're going to do it. Now, to get back to Senator Dibble's bill, and sorry for that detour, but to get back to this bill, what I appreciate most about it is that it's tactful. Senator Dibble's first bill, the Association of Minnesota Counties had concerns that it would erode that fundamental tax principle that the assessor shall not reduce, which for the majority of the state, counties stand firmly in support of, especially after the fears of 2 decades ago. Senator Dibble's bill takes, especially the amendment, takes as Senate Council points out, the precedent that was set even prior to 2013 of allowing certain counties who had specific conservation programs to allow their assessors, by board resolution, to value these properties a little differently. We think that makes sense. We think that's reasonable for this case. We support Hennepin's efforts in this, and we, again, appreciate Senator Dibble's willingness to dig into this messy issue and try to protect those differing interests. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hilgard. Are there questions or comments for Mr. Hilgard? Seeing none, Senator Dibble, would you like to make a final comment?
Just thanking Madam Chair and members for your time and attention. And if you continue to have any questions as this bill is laid over and is further considered, I am fully available to respond to any conversations or questions you might have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Dibble. And Senate File 2199, as amended, is laid over.
Thank you.
The final bill before us today is Senate File 2293. Senator Weber. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for hearing Senate File 2293 today. This bill deals with the student loan education assistance paid by critical access dental clinics. A couple of definitions that Senate Council has included in their page to you are important to note as to the definition of a critical access dental clinic and a student loan educational assistance payment. The student loan educational assistance was developed by IRS Code Section 127 some years ago. And what this bill does is it will allow a continued reduction of income for $5,250 per year of educational assistance or loan payments from a employee's wages. Quite frankly, Madam Chair and members, maintaining dental clinics in rural Minnesota has been a major problem for some time. Due to the nature of the reimbursement of critical access dental offices and the low level of payment that is made, it has been a situation where, quite frankly, many private clinics have turned away medical assistance and insure a patient for that particular purpose. And so as a result, the income for these facilities is difficult to maintain, and to allow this as to try and attract key personnel into their clinics, this item is, I think, of major importance as an attraction to those particular people. Today, I have with me John Cornelius, Executive Director of Caring Hands Dental Clinics, and he has further information on this particular issue. And one final comment, Madam Chair, as we look at the fiscal analysis here, We see that there really is not an influence because these amounts have not been collected in the past, and this would continue that process.
Are there questions for Senator Weber and/or questions about the revenue estimate before we get to the witness? Seeing none, welcome to the committee. If you would identify yourself for the record.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is John Cornelius. I'm the Executive Director with the Caring Hands Dental Clinic, and I appreciate the consideration and support for this bill and Senator Weber for the authorship. We have two clinic locations, one in Alexandria and one in Pipestone. Pipestone's a geographical shortage area or health professional shortage area and a low-income location, and both of the clinic locations together, we have a total of 5 providers at the moment, going to 6 in May, 7 hygienists, and the rest of the 34 staff make up our entire operation. So we have found a way to make the payments that come from the low income, the uninsured, special needs, or underserved patients that are publicly insured Minnesotans work for the clinics at this moment in time. In order to remain competitive and attract additional talent and keep those clinics in operation, you have to have above average benefits to do so. And so with this ask and with this, this is one aspect or one area that will help us significantly attract, and not only attract, but keep talent in those areas and in those communities. We ended up serving 591 zip codes last year at 2 locations, which screams access is limited at this juncture. So this is today for this committee, and again, appreciative of the consideration and support, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Then we'll, Mr. Estenson. Mr. Estenson chooses not to testify. Any other questions or comments? This is the kind of the dream revenue estimate that all of us long for, that either shows no impact, negligible, or unknown. When the parentheses are around the words, it's assumed that it will be a benefit to the taxpayer and not to the state. Just pointing that out. Parentheses mean a big deal in this committee. Any further comments for Senator Weber? Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think maybe the question's for the testifier. I'm curious, is there discussion of this continue? I'm just reading the revenue estimate text here, and is there discussion about the federal government renewing this? It's supposed to expire the end of this year. What's the discussion right now?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Cornelius.
We are working on that currently. Yes, that is the plan to do that, extend that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Weber, anything further to conclude the discussion of this bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just simply, again, it's an important element to maintaining the staffing of these clinics, and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Then Senate File 2293 will be laid over. Announcements. We will be having the language of the governor's tax proposal will be our subject tomorrow. And we'll be meeting then from 8:30 to 9:30 for the presentation of it. I consider it more of an informational hearing. The proposal would then be laid over. Certainly, when the omnibus tax bill, I do not have an indication yet from Chair Davids or Chair Gomez about what's going to be the vehicle for the omnibus bill. But I'm assuming that some of the provisions in the governor's bill will be part of that and open to a lot more discussion. We're allowing the 40 minutes for the Department of Revenue to present the bill. We've already had one hearing on the proposal, but of course, we didn't have the language at that time. And depending on how much time we have, we will certainly permit 20 minutes or so of testimony. As is my usual practice, I'm only interested in testifiers who oppose something. We don't need to hear from people who like our bills, just from people who do not like them. So that is, so we will end at 9:30. The Legislative Audit Commission will be meeting in the second hour of the usual schedule for the tax committee. Any questions? Seeing none, there being no further business, the tax committee is adjourned.